Hi, this is Vijaya from GMAT Superia. And example logic, we'll also see another type of logic called statistics. They're very easy to identify. You will see numbers, ratios or percentages. Right? Now you must also choose to read the question stem properly. Look at the question stem here. Of the following, the best criticism of the conclusion that inducing cigarette smokers to switch brands does not pay is that the conclusion is based on. A little more clarity on the question. You're criticizing the conclusion. And for your convenience now, look at this. The conclusion is already given in the question. It is, inducing cigarette smokers to switch brands does not pay. This is the conclusion. You're criticizing the conclusion because the conclusion is based on. Any conclusion is based on some logic, some evidences. You're criticizing the conclusion because the logic is faulty. In other words, this is very similar to the previous question. You are asked to find a flaw in the evidences, the logic. And survey shows that 10% of the cigarette smokers only switch brands. Manufacturers have been spending an amount equal to 10% of their gross receipts on cigarette promotions. It follows from these figures that inducing cigarette smokers to switch brands does not pay, and that cigarette companies would have been no worse off economically if they had dropped their advertising. So the conclusion that inducing cigarette smokers to switch brands does not pay, and so cigarette companies should not be wasting their money on advertising, is based on a survey statistics. So this is statistics. The moment you recognize that the logic is statistics, why don't you just directly go to the options and see whichever option questions the statistics. Alright? Now, statistics can work in two ways. That a generalized statistics may not apply to a particular case, or statistics of one particular case may not apply for the entire population or the industry. Now, here we can see that the questioning of the numbers, the ratios or the percentages is done only in option E. Figures for the industry as a whole may not hold particular for a particular company. That means each company cannot be advised not to advertise expecting people to switch brands based on the overall industry statistics. Alright, it could be that a certain company can benefit. It may find that 80% of the people switch brands, favoring them through advertisements. So is it advisable for them not to follow the conclusion, the suggestion here, not to advertise? And that is not something that you can advise that company, which means that the overall statistics may not apply to each. The 10% is for the entire industry. So figures for the industry may not hold for a particular company is the error in the statistical logic. Manufacturers produce one brand, people are loyal to a single brand, past patterns of smoking. Why don't you see B, C, D as nothing to do with the line of reasoning that is statistics? A also you can eliminate. Computing advertising costs as a percentage of gross receipts is not questioning the survey statistics. So in statistical arguments, it's better for you to understand that the statistics may not represent the entire population, or overall statistics of the population may not apply to each. The last one is causal logic. Now, let me also tell you from my analysis of hundreds and hundreds of critical reasoning questions over the years that it may be at times a bit difficult to identify causal logic. But interestingly, the majority of CR arguments is based on causal logic. So one of the ways is that if you were to look back at the three arguments we discussed, the exemplar, one example to a general conclusion, analogy, one situation based on which we draw a conclusion for another situation, or numbers and then we draw a conclusion. If you can identify these three, and if you can recognize an argument of any of these three, and if you find that an argument doesn't have statistics, example or a comparison, then you can be rest assured that the argument is based on causal logic. I must now emphasize one point, that especially when it comes to evaluation of the argument questions, this classification of the type of logic would come handy. It is not necessary that all the critical reasoning questions are based on all these four. No, You will see deductive reasoning, you will see hypothetical syllogisms, you will see conditional arguments, which we shall discuss in some other presentation some other time. But for the evaluation questions in terms of identifying the strengths and weakening in the arguments, you can expect one of these 4 types in every single argument. Now here, if you could study the question, black Americans are on the whole twice as likely as white Americans to develop high blood pressure. This likelihood also holds for westernized black Africans when compared to white Africans. Researchers have hypothesized that this predisposition in westernized black may reflect an interaction between western high salt diet and genes adapted to an environmental scarcity of salt. Which of the following statements about present-day westernized black, if true, would most strengthen or confirm the researcher's hypothesis? So this is not statistics, this is not example to a generalization, this is not analogy. So it is causal. Now what is the causal factor? The causal factor is high salt diet and genetic adaptation to shortage of salt. And the effect of the cause is high blood pressure among westernized blacks. You are asked to strengthen it. The first thing you may need to identify is you need to go through the options and see the one option that further strengthens, yes, there is a causal correlation. There is a correlation between high BP and among the westernized blacks, and it is impacted by a genetic adaptation to environmental scarcity of salt and high salt diets that they now follow. Run through the options and you would see that you could eliminate B, C. Now you have A and D. The blood pressure of those descended from people situated throughout their history in Senegal and Gambia, where salt was always available, was low. That means the blood pressure was low among the people who did not follow westernized diet. Now don't you think that further strengthens that the high BP among the westernized blacks is because of an interaction between high salt diet and genetic adaptation? Yes, because it says A causes B. So if you have not seen B, which means there is no A. That's one way of looking at it. D says blood pressures are low among the Yoruba, who throughout their history have been situated far inland from sources of sea salt and far south of Saharan salt mines, which means they have not been used to availability of salt. It says far inland from sources of sea salt. Okay, so it means that they may not have salt available for consumption. So we must show that wherever salt was available for consumption, and those who did not follow westernized diet, their blood pressure is low, which further strengthens the argument. So we can choose A as the one which further strengthens this causal logic. Now, how do we identify causal argument? There is a little bit of vocabulary here. If you were to see within a paragraph, caused by, responsible for, leads to, promoted by, etc., 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 you can be rest assured that this is a causal logic. Now, how do we weaken a causal logic? If the speaker says A causes B, you can find an alternate cause that has led to B. Or we can say that even when the cause did not happen, the effect happened. Or the effect was observed when there was no cause at all. These are some of the ways in which you could question and weaken a causal logic. And that comes to the end of this small presentation. For the uninitiated or the people who are just getting started off with the GMAT preparation, some sort of thinking would have been induced with this small endeavor and effort, and I'm sure that you will go into the critical reasoning with an open mind, study the arguments, explore the logic. Instead of looking at merely the solutions and explanations, why don't you go behind the argument and understand the logic of each of the arguments? And if you can do that, it's an excellent way to take your preparation forward, and you will see that you are a little more comfortable with the categories of questions. When you go through this argument in the official guide, look at the way the explanation is done, the approach that each of the questions take. If you can follow those strategies into a genre of questions, I mean, the learning transfer will definitely come handy and you will be much more comfortable in less time. Okay, so all the best for your preparation, and we shall meet up for the third of the series on reading comprehension. So happy preparation, happy learning. Thank you.